Prohibition is the classic example. Where prohibition was, just for the crime of having a drink, we ended up with gangsters, Al Capone, smuggling, a lack of morals, corrupt politicians, corrupt judges, corrupt police. And all of that went away very shortly after the repeal of the Prohibition Amendment. Government said, we're going to take away your right to have a beer. And the result was bedlam. Bedlam that ended literally within weeks, if not months, of the repeal of Prohibition. Now, if you want to have a drink, at worst, you must show some ID to show that you're 21. Or you can't buy it because it's Sunday and we have blue laws here. But when government got out of the way, things got better. Why is this? The important thing to remember is this has been tried throughout time. Our founding fathers had some weird notions when they wrote them. Some of them wanted to put bans on dancing, on the kind of clothes women wore. They had a few social ideas that just didn't really get very far in the Constitutional Convention. Thank God. But the question is, if we've been trying this over and over and over and over and over again, in here, in Europe, in Japan, in Asia, and the result has been the same, why do we still keep seeing this impulse for government to do something? And when government does something, why does it still fail? Because let's face it, we all know people who work for the government. They're not dumb. This is a military town. Most of the people I know who serve in the military are smart, capable, and among the most ethical people I've ever met. But why do government programs fail, and why does it keep us from fixing things? Because on paper it makes sense. Well, for starters, it's because no group of experts, no bureaucrats, no politicians can replace the free choice of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of individuals. The marketplace isn't some abstract concept. It is the result of you making literally hundreds of decisions every day on how you spend your time, your money, your effort, your resources. Do I buy Coke or do I buy Pepsi? Do I drive or do I take public transportation? Do I wear a red shirt or white shirt? Do I buy blue jeans or slacks? These are all decisions that go into the marketplace every day. Who do I vote for? What television shows do I watch? And that collective knowledge is transmitted through various economic principles, like price. Price isn't what the cost of something is. That's what it is when you pay for it. That's good for you. But it tells you things. Gas was $3.98 at the gas station up the road. That price tells people who are in the oil business to start making more oil because there's money to be made. People who operate rigs in the North Sea that are expensive to operate because it's in the middle of the Arctic Ocean will send crews out to produce it because it's now cost-effective to get oil out of the North Sea fields in the Arctic Ocean. All those rigs that were down here but are idle, the portable rigs down here in the Gulf that were idle because of the oil spill and the fact that the U.S. government isn't allowing drilling, very expensive ships are towing those very expensive rigs elsewhere to other places at huge cost. Towing a rig to a new location costs tens of millions of dollars. And they're doing it right now, excuse me, because you can make money at it. That's a government effect. Those rigs are not sitting in the Gulf of Mexico producing oil. They're going somewhere else because those resources are needed. That's a result of price, supply, and demand. These laws aren't changed. You can't pass a law that says all cars will be more fuel efficient because if they were more fuel efficient, they'd be made. There'd be a demand for it, if there was demand for it. Politicians cannot solve problems by thinking of things that the market hasn't, because the market invariably would have done it. The market also triggers innovation during times of crisis. Look at the internet. Look at all the millions of things you can do. Music, videos, YouTube, email, everything, games. All those things were created by entrepreneurs, by individuals. And if you remember, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of that startups involved 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 people. Apple Computers, 6 people. Microsoft, 4 people. I have an uncle who was in on that ground floor. And he and a group of 3 guys decided to put together something that we use every day. It's called the CAT scan. That's what computing did. It allowed 3 or 4 guys to take existing technology and develop a medical scanner that has saved millions of lives. Something I'm very proud of because he's my uncle. But that's the amazing thing, is when there was demand for things, millions of people tried things and millions of people invented things, and we see the best. You want a good example of this? How many of you have watched American Choppers? Great show. About a guy and his son build motorcycles and yell at each other the whole time. It's TV gold. Watch the show if you haven't. The one thing that will strike you is these guys are not smart. They're not college graduates. They probably couldn't make it through college if they wanted to. But because of advances in computing, they're using machine tools, advanced mechanical tools, design tools, and computers to build beautiful motorcycles that are literally sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And these guys are morons. But that's the key. Computing and the internet allows a lot of people to try doing things they couldn't do when there was a lot of access. And that's the key, is the internet as it is allows people to try things. You want to start a business on the internet, you can do it for about $100 or less. If you know where to look, you can actually do it for free. You can start a small business that sells knives, like the gentleman in Japan I told you about. He probably only makes about $2,000 or $3,000, maybe $5,000 a year making these knives and selling them on the internet. It's a hobby that pays for itself. But if the government starts regulating the net, the government starts imposing costs, the government starts making it difficult, it's no longer effective for this guy to sell his knives on the internet. He might make fewer knives per year. It might just be a hobby that he does for family and friends. And then we would all be poor because people like me who one day decided they needed a new knife and found it and bought it for $30 wouldn't be able to do that. And think about that across everything. You can buy parts for your car. I just bought a small part to repair my sprinkler system on the internet for $20. All the things we do on the internet are there because individuals have the ability to get in and innovate. And it's not just one individual. It's not a research and development company. It's not a dedicated scientist. It's people like you in this audience who suddenly decide they want to do something, and they do it because it's cheap. It's easy. The risks are low. That guy in Japan probably only had to spend about $100 a year to keep his little internet website going. The downside, he wouldn't do it if it cost him several thousand a year. And if he loses, what's he out? A couple $100? He's probably made that back. And that's because the government isn't in the internet. Politicians and special interests have different goals than we do. That's the difference between the market and socialism. Bureaucrats will look at things and try and worry about things like safety, fraud, waste, and abuse because they get in trouble when those things happen. In the FDA, the lady who stopped the use of thalidomide in America was given a medal and a lot of rewards. She was a hero. And that's a good incentive because you don't get punished for banning something. You do get punished if you let something through. And I'll give you a good example. If a terrorist were to slip past a TSI person and blow up a plane, people would lose their jobs, people would be embarrassed, people would be vilified. It's better to be overcautious and not let anyone on board. That's why this fingernail clipper that I used this morning cannot be taken on any airline. If there is anyone who can hijack an airplane with this fingernail clipper, I will give you $1,000 because it can't be done in my opinion. If I were to try and hijack an airline with this today, the little old lady in the seat next to me would probably beat the tar out of me for crying out loud. That's a bureaucratic incentive. Which is better? I can tick off a lot of people and let them gripe and let them come up on stage and talk to a lot of other people and gripe about this. But God forbid it actually happened. God forbid somebody actually hijacked an airline. And this is done throughout government. It's why there's so many rules and regulations. Somebody gets a free $1,000 piece of equipment out of the government, they put a lot of forms in place that you have to fill out to make sure that never happens again, even though that makes life worse. A couple of teenagers used driver's licenses to get fake driver's licenses to get beer underage. That's part of the reason why when you go to the DMV to get your driver's license renewed, you're there for 2.5 hours. You can get the same information on the same card at Sam's when you get their little identity card in about 10 minutes. Why? Bureaucratic inertia. Politicians are also affected the same way. Politicians have to get reelected. Politicians get elected by promising to fix things. And my apologies to Don Brown, who was a politician and never did that. But the point is, politicians will give solutions. They will say things like, we need to regulate the internet to make sure access is free. And when things go wrong and the internet is not as good as it used to be, when it affects our economy, those politicians will be gone. The housing bust was caused by politicians wanting to encourage home ownership. They wanted to make sure that everybody could have access to housing. They wanted more working class people to own houses. Owning houses is good. For you youngsters, if you can swing it, owning a house is one of the smartest financial moves you can make. Period. And Congress wanted more of this, so they created Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to basically subsidize loans to people, to minorities, to working class individuals, people who couldn't afford them. All that did was it drove supply up. It drove the supply of money up. And demand for housing went up as well. Housing prices kept rising. It also enabled speculators to get cheap loans to buy more house than they could possibly afford. Banks really stopped paying attention to lending requirements because Fannie and Freddie are going to be buying these loans. It's not going to be our problem. And for politicians that promoted these ideals, they're not getting blamed. The people who started Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac aren't in office anymore. Most of them have passed away of natural causes, but they got the benefit of starting it. I'm a property attorney. I looked into the history of this extensively. I probably know it better than anyone else in Northwest Florida because it's my job. And I can tell you this, when Fannie and Freddie were created, the same arguments and same gripes about a possible housing bust were raised at the same time. It was a well-known issue, and it still went forward because politically they could get a good return on their investment. And finally, you have special interests. All this regulation you've seen, one of the trends you need to keep in mind is invariably special interests come to capture it. And it's usually the big businesses that everyone said we need these laws to prevent them from exploiting the people because corporations are greedy and evil. In trains, airlines, phones, public utilities, big sugar, big oil have all benefited. A good example was in the early 1900s when the Food and Drug Administration was created. It was done in response to a book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And basically it pointed out how god-awful the meatpacking industry was. It was unsanitary, it was gross, it was unhealthy. The book reads like a Stephen King novel in places. The problem, though, is it turned out that Upton Sinclair made a lot of the stuff up. So I don't know how true the book was. But Teddy Roosevelt read it, and he said, we're going to do something about it. He had a much higher pitched voice, so it probably sounded funny when he said it, but he created the FDA. And believe it or not, the big meatpacking interests got in behind it because what happened was they could now get government inspectors in their plants, so their product said government approved, USDA approved, Food and Drug Administration approved. And as a result, that was a stamp of approval, even though we found out much later that the government inspectors didn't do a very good job. And also with all this regulation, the big companies could easily consolidate and do well. Smaller companies, mom and pop butchers, for example, couldn't handle those regulations. They went out of business. And because you had to have all this specialized and sanitary equipment now, the cost of getting into the meatpacking business became prohibitive. That's why in this nation you don't see mom and pop butchers anymore. They're all in supermarkets at best. You go to Europe and everyone goes, oh, how quaint, they have all these small groceries, and they have all these nice butchers, and they make little fresh bakeries. Because they don't have an FDA and a USDA regime like we do that keeps them from being able to get into the business.